Hello. Today I'm taking a look at a New Zealand Pinot Noir. The wine in question is Brassknocker. It's the 2023 vintage of that. This is made by the McArthur Ridge winery, and they're based in Alexandra in central Otago. So I wanted to look at a wine from McArthur Ridge because they're a winery that has sort of relatively recently burst onto the international scene by making some really delicious Pinot Noirs that actually represent some really great value. And as a result of that, they've won both trophies and gold medals in both national and international wine competitions. And I'm interested in what they're doing here because as New Zealand's wine industry is trying to diversify away from its signature Sauvignon Blanc, I think Pinot Noir is becoming an increasingly important variety in the national portfolio, as it were. And really, if you're going to be able to repeat the success that New Zealand's had with Sauvignon Blanc, you want to be able to produce these value for money wines regularly, reliably and consistently. And that can be a huge issue with Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir quite rightly has this justification as being the heartbreak grape. It's a very challenging variety, and winemakers aspire to make brilliant Pinot Noir, yet at the same time its characteristics and its ripeness can vary enormously from vintage to vintage. And so the reason I'm interested in McArthur Ridge, they do seem to be able to produce good value, delicious Pinot Noirs on a regular basis. There are two wines in particular that they make, the Southern Tor, and secondly the Brassknocker, which is sort of their second wine, that currently seem to be reliably delivering in terms of quality and value for money. So McArthur Ridge is owned by a group of shareholders. It's not a family-owned company or something like that. They planted their first vines in 2002. They made their first wine in 2006. In 2007, they had somewhere in the region of 180 hectares of Pinot Noir planted in this region of Alexandra. And they've been able to do this because of a combination of the availability of glacial meltwater for irrigation, the incredibly free-draining fractured rock and gravel soils that they have here. And without this irrigation water, viticulture would be a challenge. I mean, my understanding is, for instance, in the last year, the annual rainfall was only somewhere in the region of 300 millimetres, which isn't enough to sustain vine growth on its own. The vineyards here are between 200 and 300 metres above sea level. They're on an elevated plateau of rolling glacial moraine, so this fractured rock. The vineyards gently slope north, so you've got really good sunlight inception, but at the same time you've got the cooling effect of the southerly location and of the altitude. So there is this ability both to ripen grapes because of the sunshine, while at the same time they can retain freshness and perfume because of these cooling influences. Now, the rather curious name Brassknocker is a result of the quite particular soil type that they have here, which is referred to as Brassknocker gravel. So this is fractured rock that's been broken as a result of rock being frozen and thawing again in this southern location. And the gravels were produced by this weathering. Evidently the designation Brassknocker refers to a location in the UK where this soil type is found, a place called Brassknocker Hill, that relates to the fact that there'd been a house there with a very prominent brass knocker on it. And evidently this location is in the Brassknocker Basin, and this is in the Cotswolds in England. So with the completion of the establishment of the vines in 2007, the next stage for McArthur Ridge was to perfect their winemaking. And in 2020 the operation was joined by somebody called Connell, who had spent the previous 7 years working for a producer called Otago and was familiar with making wines in central Otago. Clearly by 2020 the oldest vines were 18 years old. They were starting to get some reasonable vine age and the quality of the fruit was good. But Matt really got into his stride very quickly because his first three vintages, the 2020, 2021 and 2022, all managed to win gold medals at the International Wine Challenge in London, with the 2021 carrying away a trophy. That same vintage also won a gold medal that year in the Decanter World Wine Awards. Now, looking at the winemaking for this wine, as I say, it's referred to as a second wine. What I've been able to find out is about the winemaking for the Southern Tor, so I would presume there's similar winemaking being applied to this. It's just that there's a selection and probably parcels with less new oak influence or shorter period aging in oak are going into the Brassknocker. So what you're seeing is the fruit being picked by parcel. It's hand picked, it's destemmed, crushed, and it undergoes a 5-day cold soak. So before the fermentation starts, it's kept cool and the skins are soaking in what is at that stage juice, so it's an aqueous solution. There's no alcohol being produced yet, so it's a much softer extraction because alcohol will enhance the extraction of tannins and that sort of thing in that situation. So this is a much better way of getting colour, perfume and a softer structure out of the wine. So fermentation took place in small open fermenters, so with capacities of between 1 and 5 tons. And this enabled quite a gentle cap management regime. So the grape skins had risen with the carbon dioxide giving off by the ferment to the top. They're gently pushed back down into the fermenting must again. There will be some pump over, but this approach makes it quite easy to prevent over extraction of harsher tannins. Now the notes I have for the Southern Tor say that some of the fermentations are allowed to take place with indigenous yeasts and others are inoculated. And they also note that they take quite a lot of care that the cultured yeasts they select are those that are suited to working with the clone of Pinot Noir from that particular parcel. On average, fermentation took about 3 weeks, and then following that the wine was put into barrel where it underwent its malolactic fermentation. Now again, the notes I've seen for the Southern Tor suggest that 20% of the wine ages in new oak and the balance is aged in 2nd, 3rd and 4th year oak. These will be French oak barrel, will be 225 litre barriques. Now presumably at the selection stage the wines that go into Brassknocker are much less likely to be those that have been aged in new oak. And barrel aging went on for about 10 months. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? I've got it in a nice big glass here so I can swirl it properly there. In terms of the colour, it seems to be quite a sort of a darkish ruby, but it's not very deep. I would say that was at best medium intensity. Swirling it, the wine has 13.5% alcohol according to its label, and immediately it's forming some tears running down the side of the glass there. So let's see what make of the aroma, shall we? Oh, there is a really beautiful, rich perfume there, ripe fruit. You're starting with sort of red fruit, sort of raspberry, mulberry, those sort of lively aromas. There are some notes of spices, but then also there's a sort of a rich, ripe, almost sort of dark red to black cherry, sort of quite a sweet, rich, intense, almost sort of jammy fruit note there. And while there are 1 or 2 spice hints, this really is a wine whose nose is dominated by open, ripe fruit. So let's have a taste. The palate is sort of fairly light to medium bodied. There's a very good freshness that comes through straight away. There's a smoothness, there's a sort of a chocolatey roundness to the texture of the wine. Any tannins that are there are velvety, but then the acidity is giving a lovely juicy note as the wine goes on. You've got those sort of open raspberry and mulberry notes just sort of starting to show, but then actually those notes of chocolate that I was talking about, perhaps a note of coffee-like bitterness coming through there. The alcohol's giving a little bit of warmth, and then there perhaps you're seeing a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg spices, sweet spices coming through. There's a rich, I suppose slightly jammy red plum note on the finish that is lasting reasonably well. There's an openness and a ripeness to the wine. Given that there didn't seem to be a huge dose of oak on the nose, I'm actually surprised by quite how savoury the mid-palate manages to be. And yet there is also lively, juicy red fruit. Now the notes from the producer suggest that this is a wine that in 5 to 8 months' time would probably have opened up a little more and would probably be even more impressive than it is. Looking at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score that this has, this vintage is marked as 91 out of 100, which I think is a really good score for a wine of this price. So that you can find out about pricing, I'll leave a link to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available near you and what that price is, and that way you can make the value comparison. I guess as far as the wine's concerned, I'm quite impressed. I was expecting that it would be quite simple with good forward fruit. It certainly achieves. There's a juiciness, the acidity's lifting ripe fruit really quite well, and there's some nice balance from the notes of alcohol. But what's actually quite impressive is the structural element, the sort of the smoothness, the velvety nature of the tannins. I don't think this is a wine for long aging. I don't think it needs to sit in your cellar for any time at all. I think juicy, delicious now. I really do think this is a wine that's been very thoughtfully made in a style to be easy drinking and accessible now. I think really shows off quite how attractive New Zealand's Pinot Noirs can be. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you found this tasting of interest. If you've enjoyed it, do please press the like button, that would be fantastic. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, do please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It would be great to have your support there, and also that way you can set yourself an alert and you'll be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have any comments, please do let me know. Do pop them in the comments box below. It would be great to hear what you think about New Zealand's Pinot Noirs, whether you've tried any of McArthur Ridge's wines, or if there are other areas you also think deliver excellent value for money for Pinot Noir. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on. That would be a really fantastic endorsement from you. I appreciate that very much. So thank you so much for watching, and I do hope you'll manage to find some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.